Hello, sixth graders. So today we are going to start a new topic, okay, or part of the topic. It's topic 1-3, and it's called use variables to write expressions. So an expression, okay, we've been dealing with expressions. Yesterday when we were solving problems for using order of operations, those were all expressions. And basically an expression is something that has variables and operations in a number sentence, all right? Now, we're also going to talk about exactly what variables are. But before we get to that, I want to just go over really quick. Common operation words, okay? So instead of saying addition, what are some other words that we hear in math that stand for addition? Well, the classic one is sum. Okay, we hear that a lot. The sum of two numbers, that means we're going to add them. Okay, another one you can think of is in all. Okay, all together. If we hear these words, it tells us we are going to add. Combined. And even added to. So those are all phrases that we hear. When we hear those phrases, it tells us, okay, we are going to add. Now let's think about subtraction. Okay, what are some words that tell us we're going to subtract? The biggest one is difference. Find the difference of 10 and 3. That tells us we're going to subtract them. Less than, if you hear the word less than, that tells us that we're subtracting. Minus. The word from, I actually want you to put a star next to that or something, or an exclamation point, because from, you don't think it has to do with subtraction, but it does, okay? 5 away from 10 tells us that we are doing 10 minus 5, okay? Another one is fewer than. Okay, and the classic subtract. If we see the word subtract, we know we're subtracting. Okay, multiplication. What are some phrases that stand for multiplication? Okay, well, we know product. Okay, the product of 5 and 3 is 15. That means 5 times 3 is 15. I just said it right there, the word times. Okay. And we're going to talk about this in a little bit. We talked about this a little bit in 5th grade, but when you see the word of, okay, like 1/2 of 7, that means we're multiplying half times 7. And lastly, now we're dealing with division. Some words and phrases that represent division. We have quotient. Okay, that tells us the quotient of two numbers. We're dividing those two numbers. Per. Okay, $5 per person. If there's $20 in total, you know you're doing 20 divided by 5. Okay, and split, same thing. Okay, let's split the bill. We want to split it evenly. Well, you're dividing whatever the bill is for wherever you went by how many people you have in order to see what each person is paying. Okay, so it's really important to know all of these words and phrases that represent addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division for the lesson that we're going to be doing today. So let's go to the next slide. So how to show multiplication when using variables. This is a really important tool because a lot of the times when we represent multiplication, we just do this, 2 times 4, which is great, okay? But we're going to be using these things called variables, okay? We're getting into algebra. We're going to be using these symbols called variables, and it's going to make this multiplication problem a lot more difficult if we use the standard X for multiplication, and I'll explain that in a second. First, we need to figure out, wait a second, what is, Miss Rothstein, what is a variable? Okay, so a variable is a letter or symbol of, a letter or symbol that stands for an unknown quantity. Okay, so that letter or symbol stands for something that we don't know. It takes the place of something. Okay, now the variable that we use a lot of the time in algebra or this math series that we're doing is the letter X. So do you see how confusing it's going to be if we keep using this multiplication X to show multiplication? Because if we're using this variable right here, this X, to stand for an unknown, we don't want to have two X's right next to each other because that's going to be really confusing. So instead, we come up with different ways to show multiplication instead of using the X. So the first way is called, I like to say, call it the dot. So since we usually use X to represent our variable, we don't want to confuse ourselves. Instead of using an X to represent multiplication, just use a dot. So instead of writing 2 times 4, we just write 2 times 4, but using that dot instead. And the dot stands for multiplication. Easy enough. The next one is, I phrase it the smush. Okay, I don't really know what other way to say it, but when you are multiplying a number times a variable, you can get rid of the multiplication sign completely. You can get rid of that sign. When a variable and another number or another variable are smushed together, it stands for multiplication. So let's look at this example. 2 times y, since we have a number right here and a variable that stands for an unknown right there, we can just take out that multiplication sign and just smush them together. So 2 times y is the same thing as just 2y. And the last way to represent multiplication is using parentheses. So if a number or variable is directly on the outside of a set of parentheses, that means they are being multiplied together. So 2 times, because the dot stands for multiplication, 5 minus 3 equals 2 parentheses 5 minus 3. We can take out that dot, that multiplication sign, and just put that 2 right outside the parentheses. And then we actually solved it. Well, we know 5 minus 3 is 2, so 2 times 2. Okay. Another way to show that, you can represent it by doing 2 like that. Another way to show 2 times 2 is just to do 2 parentheses 2. That stands for the same thing. So all three, so we have 1, the dot, 2 when they're smushed together, and 3 parentheses. Those are 3 different ways we can represent multiplication instead of using an X. Okay, we're trying to get rid of using an X for multiplication. So now let's do some examples using those things. So we are going to write out expressions by reading a sentence. All right, so let's look at this example. Hints and tricks. So for example, if I were to say a phrase like the product of 5 and 3, we are going to write out what that expression would look like. Okay, so I'm going to go over some hints and tricks for you. When you see the phrase, the sum, difference, product, quotient of blank and blank, okay, the end is where you put the symbol. So for example, the quotient of a number and 5, okay? Well, first of all, quotient stands in my mind. I know quotient stands for division, okay? So we have a number. That's an unknown. So what did we learn represents an unknown? They're just saying a number. We don't know what number it is. Well, a variable. So we can use X as that number. So the quotient of a number and 5, this end, if we're dealing with something and something, okay, and we're doing, we have the quotient of them, this end is where we could put that division sign. So all it is, the quotient of a number and 5 is X divided by 5. Now, when you're typing this into your notes, you can just do X/5, and that stands for division. The next trick I want to go over, when you see the phrase blank is more than or less than blank. It's a little weird, but the number that's in the front always goes at the end. So 5 less than a number. Now, we don't know what this number is right here, so that's going to stand for X. A variable represents that unknown. Now, less. When you see the word less, if you need to look at your other slide, what does less stand for? Well, less stands for subtraction. So this 5, when you see blank less than a number, the 5 goes at the end. So it's X minus 5. So now we're going to try some out. Look at these and see what you can do. All right, try these out on your own first. So the difference of a 3 and a number, okay? So a number is X. The difference of 3 and a number is going to be 3. Difference stands for subtraction minus X. 12 less than the product of a number and 5, okay? So the product of a number and 5 is what we're going to focus on first, and we're going to put that in parentheses. So a number, whenever they say a number, it's just X. Or it could be Y, it could be Z, but we just use X most often. So the product of a number and 5, product stands for multiplication. So X, we'll do the dot, times 5. You can also do 5X if you want. And then since we're doing 12 less than, this 12, remember, look at this rule right here. It goes in the back. So minus 12. Okay, because we're doing 12 less than that. 15 more than the product. So again, we're going to focus on the product of a number and 7. Okay, so the product of a number, which is X, and 7. Product stands for multiplication. This phrase we're going to put in parentheses to help us. So the product of a number, which is X, and 7. So we can represent that as saying 7X. One of our ways, smushing the variable and the number. And then 15 more. So again, since we're saying more than, just like this rule right here, we're going to put that at the end. So plus 15. Now, the 15 can also go in the front as well. And then lastly, twice. When we hear the word twice, that means we're multiplying by what number? We're multiplying by 2. So twice, and then it says the sum of 23 and a number. So let's focus on that. The sum of 23 and a number. A number is X, unknown. The sum stands for addition. So we have 23 plus X represents the sum of 23 and a number, and then twice that. So we can do 2 times that, or again, we learned other ways. We can do 2 dot, and then the parentheses, or the last way we learned, we can just smush that 2 on the outside of this parentheses. And again, the parentheses just help organize. So what I would suggest, okay, is to break up each sentence. Find out what goes together and think about which way they go. But also use these hints and tricks to help you as well when you're solving these. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to attach a Google form to the end of this Edpuzzle. So make sure you complete that Google form to the best of your ability. Okay, try your best, and we will review this a little bit more later. All right, have a good day.